forward to for quite a long time. And when I talked to some of those nominated for the EAC Thesis Prize, the person asked them, how is this year's cohort compared to previous years? And I would say, I don't know, because there are no previous years. This is our first year of introducing this prize, and at the EAC Foundation and Asia House, we have looked forward to have a complete, full space of young people, because we would initiate a Asian Youth Talent Day, and also invite youth from Asia studying in Denmark and combining this with the Thesis Prize. Of course, because of the COVID-19, we have to change this, and this is also why you can see you are sitting spaced out, and we will have hand sanitizers everywhere, etc., to ensure your health during this event. And we have live stream on, so when you have someone at home, you can send the link to them, and they can view you when you will receive your diploma. We are very pleased that you have accepted our invitation to participate here tonight or this afternoon, and we are very pleased about the quality of the thesis we have read. The Asia House is a knowledge sharing, knowledge building institution, and we can say that this research we have done is actually something that just entices our appetite for knowing more about Denmark and Asian relations. So warm welcome, and the member of the EAC board, Mr. Kenneth Puchani, will now introduce this prize and what the EAC Foundation and its board has thought about by initiating this new prize. And the winners of 2020 are, as I said, our first year of introducing this. So please, Kenneth.
Thank you. Fantastic to see you here, young people that has made these fantastic theses that I've been reading through, each and every one of them, 420 pages. That was new for me. It's a long time ago that I have been studying, and this is a thing that we have initiated because we in the EAC Foundation really want, as Susanne was saying, to entice young people to have focus on the biggest growing market of Asia, half of the world population, and with a compounded growth rate that is just astonishing. So, we are gathered in this house, the Asia House, because this is the house that was the first head office of the East Asiatic Company. The East Asiatic Company, not many of you would know about it. That company was in the 70s by far the largest company in the Nordic countries, measured by turnover. It was founded by that gentleman up there, Captain H.N. Anderson. And he was a man with a vision, a man that truly wanted the company that he initiated in 1897 to be one of the leading global trading, shipping and industrial enterprises in the Nordic countries. And at that time, he was a visionary founder because he had this mind-boggling, by any standard, thesis that the world is no bigger than it can be encompassed by thought. Think about that in 1897. And that is symbolized by that globus over there that he received on his 50th birthday. I believe it was on the company's 50th anniversary, where that is inscripted. Now, this vision was all started by a shipment of teak from Thailand to Denmark. And this house is built, and the teak that you see was from these shipments from Thailand, from the company's plantation there. And that led to this tremendous growth, and it became a truly global company with representation in more than 50 countries, more than 200 offices and enterprises around the world, and more than 37,000 employees. It was a company that really attracted talent that were employed by a very careful selection process and were intensively trained and prepared for later overseas postings. So this was a chance for any young, unfortunately most men at that time, but also women, to get employed and be posted overseas. In 1976, I was one that was attracted by these prospects with a particular focus on Asia and was lucky to be employed. What an inspiring world that met me as a young man from the west coast of Denmark. A worldwide business enterprise where English was the company language. That was not necessarily normal at that time. It was a very disciplined company and a schooling that we went through. It was a worldwide business enterprise where H.N. Andersen's founding values continued to inspire. And some of these values were the will to want, which breeds the capability of being able to do. It's all about will. Developing leaders who put the matter over the person and the duties over their rights. The unwritten law of reciprocity in all commercial relations. And leaders that are not led by developments, but developments are led by them. These are in many ways evergreen. And these were, also for me, after ended training, one of the few who made the grade would be posted overseas. And in my case it was Asia, Indonesia. I left Denmark with a small suitcase, moved on to Indonesia and then to Hong Kong, and then later on to Malaysia, only to return to Denmark 20 years later with a 40-foot container. And enough international experience that I gathered to be an entrepreneur and to pioneer the coffee business in Denmark and establish what was called Espresso Coffee and now Espresso House Denmark. As young people, we were inspired. We got the training, we got the opportunity to perform internationally and in Asia in particular. We were ignited by the thought of the world being no bigger than it can be encompassed by thought, and the will to want, which breeds the capability of being able to do. And that is why we in the EAC Foundation and here in Asia House are truly excited to support outstanding bachelors in their quest to be the best, to benefit Danish-Asian relations. And that is why today, it's first here, we've been looking forward to it, and we think that this is the first for many years to come. So thank you for coming, thank you for giving us the opportunity to read your thesis, and thank you for also giving me something that I've learned a lot from. So thank you very much.
So my name is Martin Bias-Iversen, and I'm the Vice Dean of International Education at CBS. And it's a great pleasure to be here at the Asia House. I often say that I can use any opportunity that arises to me to come to this house. And actually I was also here yesterday, so I come here quite often, as much as I can. And yesterday there was a luncheon, as it's called, for the ambassadors from the Asian countries. So in this room where we're sitting now, there are actually 10 ambassadors from the leading Asian countries present. And also the Danish Foreign Minister, Jeppe Kofod, was here. And it's great to be here, and before I start my speech, I maybe would say thank you to Susanne for hosting us today. So there you are. So Susanne, I think we should give Susanne an applause for hosting us here today. Susanne was also hosting us yesterday, and when Jeppe Kofod started his remarks for the ambassadors, he started by saying that there is a big crisis in the world now, and it's not only the COVID-19 crisis, but there's also a crisis in relation to international relations. There's a big pressure on international relations, and unfortunately the agenda of protectionism is strong now. So the agenda of working together is weaker, but the agenda of protectionism is stronger. And that is, I think, is right, unfortunately. But it's also why it is so important that we are here today, and that you are working hard on your studies in international business, and that you've also written these excellent theses that we have been reading rather, for this this prize. So thank you very much for that. At CBS, we also feel the crisis, not only the crisis of protectionism and of these countries not cooperating enough as they should, but also the crisis of the COVID-19. Just to give you some numbers, last year we sent out 1,088 students in the fall semester to various countries. This fall semester we are only sending out 234 students. So that's about 20% of the students that we sent out last year. So it's a very challenging time, and there are many challenges that are facing us at the same time. It's both, of course, this protectionism, this countries rising in the national agenda rather than the international agenda. But it's also, of course, the COVID-19 that is actually making it even more urgent that we focus on international studies. So it's a challenging situation. That's why it is so important that we have this prize, and it's why it's so important that you continue what you do and continue to do it at that high level you're doing it already. So in my mind, you are warriors, you are soldiers in an extremely important battle for the future. And that's the battle of being able to continue and enhance cooperation between nations, between companies, between organizations cross-border. And that is extremely critical. And that is also why it is so great to be here with you today, because that's the hope for tomorrow. That is the next generation. So those were a few words about the prize, and I also, before I start reading up the names, I'd like to talk a little bit about the process of how we have encompassed this thesis prize. It was an idea in the board of the EAC Foundation that we should have a youth strategy, and in that youth strategy we wanted to have a prize competition. And in order to do that in the right way, we wanted to cooperate with the best possible stakeholders. And the best possible stakeholders is, of course, the best programs from CBS, at least in this city, or in this country. And we're only talking about Asia. I am, of course, the one to say that the Vice Dean of International Education at CBS, and as there are nobody here present from Copenhagen University, to my knowledge at least, then I can easily go along with that line of thinking. In order to do that, we invited 3 programs, the International Business and Asia Studies, the IB program, and the Shipping program, and we invited all supervisors from these 3 programs to nominate the best thesis of this year. And that was an amazing result, and we saw extremely strong thesis coming on. And there was also, of course, a whole group of people with us who supported us in that process. And I'd like now to also to thank René Taube-Poulsen, who is here, and also Pascal and Olivia for being in that process and to supporting it and being part of the jury. So please, an applause to them as well. Thank you very much. And when we're giving applause, Simone needs to be mentioned as well. Let's give it up to Simone. Actually happening, and that's an extremely important process, and it has been a pleasure to be part of. Yes, so that was when we got the various theses, and the jury then had our meetings, and we had our readings with the many pages we had to go through, and that was again a pleasure. And when nominated, we have the nominated, and in order to get this right, I think it's important that we now mention all the nominated. And this is when I need my glasses, because then I can see the names. And the reason why we have to mention all the nominated is that there was extremely high quality across the various projects. So it was a very difficult decision. I know this is what you always say when you are nominating somebody and you're talking about a winner, but in this case it was very much how it was. It was a very difficult process, and those are excellent projects, and I think it's very promising to think about that they were behind all these projects, or these few projects, and we saw all these many projects that also has been on a high level, so that was great. So I will now mention the runners-up from the EAC Thesis Prize Award 2020.
And if they could come up and receive the certificate.
And we will ask them to come up and receive the certificate, if you didn't hear what Simone was saying. And then we will take a picture, as I understand it, and the picture will be taken from this direction, and Kenneth will also be with us on the picture. And then we take one person, because of this COVID-19 situation, we are not shaking hands, and we are only taking one student at the time. And we are keeping a distance when we are standing up here, so all matters have been taken here. So the first project that we would like to emphasize here is from Emil Brosch and Susanne Bolt Christiansen for their bachelor thesis entitled Arlas Internationalization in China. And can we ask Emil Brosch to come up here? Thank you. Here. Okay, I just read that Susanne is sick, so we move on to the next project. And the next project that we emphasize is Christoffer Meinicke Fisker and Tobias Raul Thomasen for their bachelor thesis entitled Sustainability as Competitive Advantage, the Case of Danish Crown in China. So, Christoffer Meinicke Fisker, please come up here. And Tobias Raul Thomasen. And from the Bachelor International Business and the Bachelor International Shipping and Trade program, we have also nominated Emilie Emmering Jensen and Mette Lange Mathiasen for their bachelor thesis entitled The Battle for Technological Supremacy, Estimating the Impact of the Geopolitical Tensions between China and the US on Chinese cross-border merger and acquisition activity. Title. Fantastic project. So, please, Emilie Emmering Jensen, please come on here. Yeah, that one.
Yes.
Perfect. And Mette Lange Mathiasen. And the next project we emphasize is Frederik Vestergaard Laursen and Alexander Mønster for their bachelor thesis entitled Promising Partnerships or Trojan Horses, the Effects of Chinese Acquisitions on the Performance of UK Targets. So, Frederik Vestergaard Laursen. And Alexander Mønster. And now to the moment of the winner. The winners of the 2020 EAC Bachelor Thesis Prizes are Sebastian B. Hansen and Eske Gerup for their thesis entitled The Effect of Outsourcing on Firm Market Value, a Perspective from a Small Nation. Sebastian, please come up here. Excellent. We have all this documentation of pictures when we are standing too close. And Eske Gerup. Good. So the next item of our program is now that the winning students will present their paper. So that's something that we really have been looking forward to. So hear what you have to say to us today. I can say when we made the plans for this, as Susanne also explained, we had envisioned also that we had even more people around, even also people from the companies and representatives, maybe also from embassies and others. The most important people are here now, that's for sure, because that's you and all the students, that's the most important. But of course we also envision that in the future we will have a gathering where we celebrate also on a larger scale. But as circumstances are now, of course we will do this. I think we even have to appreciate that we can be here physically. We don't know how things are already, maybe in 1 or 2 weeks, so it's great that we have you here. So please come up and make your presentation. Thank you. Den allerførste.
Den allerførste har vi lavet.
Yes, Emil. Vi har et lille billede. Vi har et billede. Det er jo bare mørkt.
Jeg er ikke professionel.
Det var det godt.
Perfekt.
Super.
Okay, so yeah, we've had the pleasure of coming here to present our perspective, at least on outsourcing, on the intent to outsource in China from a Danish perspective. And Sebastian will go through the introduction to the paper for the guys that haven't read it, and will spare you for most of the details and the statistical models, and then I'll be defending a bit why we have done what we've done, and then also the implications of the study.
Exactly, thank you so much. So, 1 year ago, exactly, Eske and I were back in China on our exchange program, and we're traveling around Asia to try to experience as much of the Asian culture as we could. And when we came back home, we started to reflect upon what we wanted to write about and all the implications of what we've learned by being in Asia. And we've heard a lot about internationalization and outsourcing from our textbooks, but wanted to try to put that into perspective through our bachelor thesis and the experiences that we had. And that's how we came up with the topic of the effect of outsourcing on firm market value, and later we then added the perspective from a small nation. So our research paper is built on 4 pillars. First of all, we started with the research objective, then we analyzed the established literature, then we ran our statistical method and ended up with our findings. So in the beginning, we figured our main research question is, does a firm does a Danish company stock generate an abnormal return when the company announces outsourcing of manufacturing activities to China? It's very, we need to be very specific here that we're only talking about manufacturing activities. We're talking about outsourcing for IT functions, etc. So after we defined our research objective, we started to analyze the established literature. And we did that in a two-step process. First, we looked at the theoretical base, what did different theories predict about this relationship between outsourcing and firm performance, and later we also looked and analyzed the empirical evidence, what other researchers found of this. And so we started with the theoretical base and found it to be very ambiguous. So we had very contradicting theories. Some of the positives that is mainly highlighted in textbooks is the ability to focus on core competencies, tapping into cheap labor, tapping into expertise in the local areas and so on, whereas on the contradicting side, we would have the negatives, which were a potential need to restructure organization, new communication flows, supply chain risks, extended supply chain cost, etc. So the theoretical base was very ambiguous. After that, we looked at the empirical evidence and found that this empirical evidence in this topic has been researched in 3 phases, and where phase 2 was building upon phase 1, phase 3 was building upon phase 2 and 1. And from that, it was very clear that some of these reports and these research papers have found small positive relationship between the two. Some have found no relationship whatsoever, and some have even found a very, very small negative impact. So again, we were left with ambiguity also from other research papers. Therefore, we also needed to run our own statistical model, where we went out, gathered our own data from the Danish firms that announced outsourcing in our analysis period, and then we applied our event study methodology. And just to be clear, the abnormal return is defined as the realized return minus the expected returns. So we supplemented our event study methodology with a multiple regression for calculating our expected returns. And to create robustness in our analysis, we added 3 models for calculating expected returns. So we had the Sharp-Lindner, very simple model, then Farmer-French 3-factor model, and then we added a 4th momentum factor to the Farmer-French to create robustness in our statistical results. By running our statistical method, we actually ended up with the finding a statistical significant negative impact in the long term. This is defined, the long term here is defined as 2 to 5 years, and our analysis period stops at 5 years, so we're not able to extrapolate further than that. And actually found no statistical significant effect in the short term and in the medium term. So we don't found any abnormal returns from day 1 to 1+ years. After looking at our results, we actually wanted to go even deeper, but were kind of constrained by the limit of our paper. So we were trying to look into further research questions where we really wanted to focus on subsequent factors, looking at what were the subsequent factors actually influencing the net impact and what were the weight that these impacts had. But before we jump the gun, we really need to be precautious when we're extrapolating our results, and this strengths and weaknesses is exactly what Eske will be talking through now.
So you can change the slide. Yeah, and as you can, I don't know how much you can see, but we have a few strengths and a few weaknesses that I would like to go through. So first of all, as Sebastian mentioned, the 3 models that we provided were pretty solid models. They are used heavily in existing literature, and we relied on those without having the time or the competencies to figure out and come up with new models. So that's partly also why. Directionally, our results are, yeah, of course they're right, but you have to be aware, and that's where the weaknesses come in, that based on a small nation means that you have limited access to data, meaning sufficient data. So as all of you guys who's written bachelors know, that it's quite a tedious task getting data, and it's also quite tedious analyzing the data when you have little to no idea on how to go about it. But as with all academia, it's an iterative process, so we got through, and what we would have liked for future studies would have been more data, so perhaps that could have been gathered from other countries with similar sizing, because we only looked at manufacturing. What I would like to actually focus on next is that what also enticed our interest in this was when we looked at the Danish statistics, is that we saw a decline in outsourcing to China from Denmark in manufacturing firms, both in firms outsourcing their core competency, but also in firms outsourcing supporting activities, which could be call centers or IT operations. So that kind of established also our interest in investigating this. What we would have liked to do more of from the weaknesses would that we have, like similar to other studies in the field of outsourcing, apply operational factors. So we would have liked to compare sales ratios, return on equity, return on assets, to gain a perspective on whether we at least were in the right direction with our results, and just to further solidify our findings. And then we believe that this would be kind of, at least when the direction of the results are here, meaning that it actually impacts negative contrary to other studies, we believe that you should interpret it with caution given the number of data points. But with the direction, it is important to look at what this has of implications for future studies. And being in the current COVID-19 situation, where one could say that we have experienced the black swan, you can argue whether it's a black swan with COVID-19, but we at least believe that it's interesting to look at what are the supply chain setups for firms when outsourcing to Asia. Are you outsourcing core activities? Are you outsourcing non-core activities? And what impact does it have on firms when such supply chains get disrupted? And what you see here is on the chart to the left, to your left, is the zonal resilience. And we don't have, with this study, and we would like to have that, we don't have any idea of why there is such a negative impact. We have no idea if it's investors valuing stocks who outsource to China lower, or whether it's actually incurrence of cost that actually lower the profits, or whether it's increased complexity in writing contracts when you outsource to Asia. But all of this is what you're trying to balance when you operate with outsourcing, meaning that either you are exposed to risk, or you erode, or you kind of take away your profits by improving, could be improving contract writing, or improving organizational flows, or sending people to Asia. So you always have to find this balance, and we believe that it would be very interesting for future studies, and maybe Sebastian will do that in his master's thesis, who knows, investigate what are the underlying motives for, or what's the underlying levers that investors are valuing, and how are they valuing it when they price their stocks. Because in the end, we have looked at the intent of outsourcing to Asia, and that is reflected in the stock price, and without the operational perspective on return on assets, return on equity, sales ratios, etc., we don't really know what's going on here, and we would like to know that. And as with all other academians, I think there's always a kind of an enticement of curiosity to investigate more, and this is the top of the iceberg, but we'll see what Sebastian goes on to explore. And of course, you're welcome to have any questions, should it be about the models or something else.
Thank you very much. And do we have some questions, or do we want to have the possibility to ask? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Well, what surprised you the most about this study?
I think when I went into conducting this study, my initial hypothesis was that actually we were to find a positive relationship. That's what we hear in the textbooks, that, okay, the effect of being able to focus on your core competencies at least, and tap into the cheap labor cost are some major benefits, whereas the cultural differences were kind of a problem that you could overcome by some managerial tricks and structures. So that was my biggest surprise, was actually our results in the end.
Yeah, and then also actually the data also surprises you a lot because we have collected outsourcing announcements back to 2000, which is 20 years back. And even though that we are online now, and everything is digital and this is digital, and then it still is impossible to find proper announcements and proper data on this work. So that was also a surprising factor. But yeah, similar to Kenneth back in the 70s, we think that it is valuable to send out people to kind of bridge across cultural difficulties that might arise when you outsource.
So you mentioned data limitation or data availability as one of your limitations, but despite that you still choose to focus only on stock price as your sort of financial measure, which would limit you to only listed companies. Did you look into what else you could use as a different measure to include non-listed companies?
I mean, as mentioned, if you were to choose non-listed firms, you would need access to their annual reports, which is possible, of course, because most private firms publish their annual reports. So you could look into, as I mentioned, operational efficiencies and operational ratios, because you want to compare on an apple-to-apple basis.
Yeah, I think the main limitation of that would be that we didn't know the exact date where we announced it, because the public companies are supposed to do it, and the private companies are not necessarily do not need to do that. So yeah, the other way I would go around it was that we were going to compile more nations, find nations with similar characteristics as Denmark, maybe the Nordics, combine them to get a larger sample size. That would be my way around it compared to including non-public companies.
Yeah, the problem was mainly the obligation of disclosing their outsourcing intentions.
Yeah, true. Makes sense.
So there have been similar studies also from other countries around the world. Maybe you can tell us a bit about what these similar studies have shown, how they differ from your results, and maybe also a little bit why you think the Danish case was as it was.
Yeah, so there's been a study in Japan focusing on manufacturing, actually outsourcing from Japan overseas to kind of the mainland Asia, Indonesia, and Malaysia, which is not mainland, but then. And they found that there was a positive impact on manufacturing and IT for outsourcing, but they didn't display the reasons or the levers to why this was. And we would have liked to do a similar analysis as they had, but Japan is structured in a different way, meaning that they apparently had a CD with the data for all the firms that did so. How they got that, I have no idea. The US did similar. There's been studies in the US showing a positive long-term impact of outsourcing overseas, of support functions mainly. And I think that's it. And then we have another study also combining US data with, I believe, some European countries, if I remember correctly, where there is no evidence of effect whatsoever. So quite ambiguous. And to your last questions about why we think the Danish firms might have performed differently.
Yeah, I looked at the Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and you actually see that Japan is, of course, more culturally similar to China in this case, but on the different cultural dimensions, you also actually see that the US is more similar to China than Denmark actually is. So the cultural gap is also larger from Denmark to China than it is from America to China. And you might also even see that some of the American companies are more experienced in going to China because they probably moved a bit earlier. Some might say, or they have more expertise within the field, they have more Chinese foreigners coming to the country whereby they can utilize their local knowledge within the headquarters of their American firms.
And another factor could also be the level of specialization in Danish firms could be higher, meaning that we have looked at pharma, which can be quite tricky. We've looked at windmills, which is not the typical thing that you would have in the US, where Vestas is quite a big player. We've looked at kind of industrial goods. So there might be something to interplay with industries as well.
Thank you very much. And when you go back and look at your bank accounts, I definitely hope that you will each find 25,000 Danish kroner on the account. Don't rush out to use all the money, because of course we will inform the Danish tax authorities about this.
Yeah.
And for all of you, I kindly invite you to some finger food and some drinks here. Please keep social distances while we're here, but we really look forward to having chats also with those who have not had the possibility to present today. So thank you very much to all of you once again, and please have some snacks and drinks.
Thank you.
I